Welcome back to Quarter Dollar. Now, I know what you're thinking. Say, wait, this channel is about quarters. Well, today we're doing something special. We're expanding into one of the most fascinating stories in American coin history. Steel Wheat Pennies. These aren't your ordinary pennies. During World War II, the U.S. Mint did something they had never done before and never did again. They made pennies out of steel, and today some of these wartime pennies are selling for over $400,000. Yes, you heard that right. A penny worth nearly $500,000. So before we dive into these 5 incredible coins, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be checking every old penny you can find. Let's get started. First up, we're looking at a 1943 Steel Wheat Penny. And folks, this is where the story gets absolutely fascinating. Now take a good look at this coin. You can see that distinctive grayish silver color. That's the steel showing through. Notice the S mint mark right there below the date, 1943 S. That tiny letter tells us this penny was struck at the San Francisco Mint. And here's what makes this coin special. You can still make out Lincoln's profile, the word liberty on the left, and in God we trust arcing over the top. The details on Lincoln's face show some wear, but they're still clearly visible. Flip it over to the reverse and you'll see those iconic wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent and United States of America. This particular coin shows moderate to heavy circulation wear with significant surface oxidation. That brownish and darker patina you see developing across both sides, especially around the edges and in the fields. But the lettering is still legible. The wheat stalks are still defined, and that's crucial for value. Now, let me tell you why 1943 was such an extraordinary year for American pennies. It was the height of World War II. Our boys were fighting overseas in Europe and the Pacific, and copper, the metal that had been used for pennies since 1793, was desperately needed for the war effort. Copper was essential for making shell casings, ammunition, communication wires, and other military equipment. Every ounce mattered. The U.S. Mint faced a serious dilemma. They needed to keep making pennies for everyday commerce, millions of them, but they couldn't use copper. So they made a decision that had never been made before and would never be made again. They switched to steel. For 1 year only, 1943, the Mint produced pennies made of zinc-coated steel. These coins were magnetic. They looked like dimes, and honestly, people hated them. They rusted easily in pockets. They confused vending machines, and they just didn't feel like real pennies. Storekeepers complained. Citizens complained. By 1944, the Mint went back to copper, using recycled shell casings from the war. So that makes 1943 the only year steel pennies were officially produced, a true one-year type coin. But here's where it gets really interesting. The San Francisco Mint, marked by that ES, produced fewer steel pennies than Philadelphia or Denver. They struck about 191 million 1943 S steel pennies. Now that sounds like a lot, but remember, we're talking about over 80 years ago. Most of these coins were spent, lost, thrown away, or rusted into oblivion. Many people didn't even save them because they thought they were worthless wartime substitutes. Fast forward to today, and surviving examples, especially in decent condition, are becoming harder and harder to find. Now let's talk about what you're really here for, the value. And this is where your jaw is going to drop. A circulated 1943 S steel penny, like the one you're looking at right now, with that moderate to heavy wear and oxidation, is worth anywhere from $15 to $75, depending on the exact grade. Not bad for a penny, right? But wait, it gets better. If you find one in uncirculated condition, meaning it never entered circulation, still has that original zinc coating shine and shows no wear whatsoever, you're looking at $300 to $600. Collectors love these in mint state, but here's where things get absolutely insane. If you find a 1943 S steel penny with a major mint error, a double die, an off-center strike, or a repunched mint mark, the value skyrockets into the thousands. Some error examples have sold for $5,000 to $12,000. And if you happen to find one graded MS67 or higher by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, meaning it's in near perfect condition with full original luster and no spots or stains, you could be holding a coin worth $25,000 to $48,000. Yes, you heard that right. A penny worth nearly $50,000. But hold on, because there's one more twist that makes this coin even more valuable. In 1943, a few copper pennies were accidentally struck When leftover copper planchets from 1942 got mixed into the steel penny production. These 1943 copper pennies are among the most famous error coins in American history. They've sold for over $300,000 at auction. Now, the 1943 S copper penny is even rarer than the Philadelphia version. Only a handful are known to exist. If you ever find a 1943 S penny that's not magnetic, that's copper colored and doesn't stick to a magnet, get it authenticated immediately. You could be holding a coin worth $500,000 or more. So how do you identify a potentially valuable 1943 S steel penny? First, check for that S mint mark below the date. Second, look at the condition. The less wear, the better. Third, examine it closely for any doubling in the letters or numbers, any off-center strikes, or any unusual characteristics. Fourth, check if it's magnetic. Real 1943 steel pennies will stick to a magnet. If it doesn't, you might have that ultra-rare copper error. And finally, if you think you have something special, get it professionally graded. It could be worth far more than you ever imagined. This 1943 S steel penny represents a unique moment in American history, a time when our nation adapted and innovated under the pressures of war. And today, these little pieces of history are worth serious money. Moving on to our second coin, and folks, this one is even more incredible. We're looking at a 1943 steel wheat penny with no mint mark, which means it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, the oldest and most prolific mint in the United States. Now, take a close look at this beauty. You can see that characteristic steel gray color with patches of oxidation and toning across the surface. Notice the date, 1943, clearly visible at the bottom right. And here's the key detail. There's no mint mark below that date. That absence of a letter tells us this penny came straight from Philadelphia. Lincoln's profile is still there. You can make out his features, his hair, his beard, though there's moderate wear from circulation. The words "In God We Trust" arc across the top, and "Liberty" sits to the left. This coin shows honest circulation wear with surface corrosion, those brownish rust spots and darker patches you see developing, especially in the fields and around the rim. Now flip it over to the reverse side, and you'll see those iconic wheat stalks flanking the words 1 cent, with the United States of America curving along the top and E pluribus unum just above. The lettering is bold and clear. The wheat stalks still show good definition, and that's what collectors want to see. But here's what makes this particular coin absolutely fascinating. The Philadelphia Mint produced more 1943 steel pennies than any other mint facility that year. They struck a staggering 684 million of these wartime pennies. That's more than 3 times what San Francisco made, and significantly more than Denver. You'd think that with so many produced, they'd be common and worthless, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because here's what happened. Most Americans in 1943 didn't think these steel pennies were worth saving. They looked strange, they felt wrong, they rusted easily, and people assumed they were just temporary wartime junk. So they spent them, lost them, threw them in jars, and forgot about them or tossed them away when they started rusting. Kids used them as play money. Soldiers carried them overseas and never brought them back. Decades passed, and millions upon millions of these coins simply disappeared. Today, finding a 1943 Philadelphia steel penny in any condition is becoming increasingly difficult. Finding one in great shape, that's like finding a needle in a haystack. Now let's talk about what made 1943 such a pivotal year in American coinage history. Remember, this was the second year of full American involvement in World War II. Our factories were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, churning out tanks, planes, ships, and ammunition. Copper was absolutely critical to the war effort. It was needed for shell casings, bullet jackets, electrical wiring in aircraft and ships, communication equipment, and countless other military applications. The War Production Board had restricted copper use for civilian purposes, and the U.S. Mint was using millions of pounds of copper every year just to make pennies. Something had to give. So the Mint made the unprecedented decision to abandon copper entirely for 1 year and switch to zinc-coated steel. These pennies were made from low-carbon steel planches coated with a thin layer of zinc to prevent rusting. They were struck on the same presses with the same dies, but they behaved completely differently. They were lighter, they were magnetic, and they looked silver instead of copper. Cashiers confused them with dimes. Vending machines rejected them. The public complained constantly. But the Mint had no choice. It was either steel pennies or no pennies at all. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. The Philadelphia Mint didn't just produce regular 1943 steel pennies. They also accidentally created some of the most valuable error coins in American numismatic history. Remember those leftover copper planchets from 1942 that we talked about earlier? Well, Philadelphia had them too. And when production switched to steel in January 1943, a few dozen copper blanks somehow made it into the steel pennies production line. The result, 1943 copper pennies from Philadelphia. These are the holy grail of error coins. Only about 20 to 40 examples are known to exist, and they've sold at auction for over $200,000. Some experts believe there could be more out there, hidden in old collections, sitting in jars waiting to be discovered. If you ever find a 1943 penny with no mint mark that doesn't stick to a magnet that has that copper color and copper weight, stop everything and get it authenticated immediately. You could be holding a $250,000 coin. But let's get back to the steel version you're looking at right now, because even without being a rare copper error, this coin is worth serious money. A circulated 1943 Philadelphia steel penny like this one, with moderate to heavy wear and surface oxidation, is worth anywhere from $10 to $60, depending on the exact grade and eye appeal. That might not sound like much, but remember, this is a penny we're talking about. A coin that was originally worth 1 cent is now worth up to 60 times that in worn condition. But here's where it gets exciting. If you find a 1943 Philadelphia steel penny in uncirculated condition, meaning it never entered circulation, still has that original bright zinc coating, and shows no wear on Lincoln's cheek or the wheat stalks, you're looking at $250 to $500. Collectors are actively seeking these in mint state condition. Now, if you find one with a major mint error, a double die obverse where the lettering or date shows clear, doubling, an off-center strike, a broad strike, or a die crack, the value jumps dramatically. Error examples have sold for anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000, depending on the type and severity of the error. And if you happen to find a 1943 Philadelphia steel penny graded MS 67 or higher by PCGS or NGC, meaning it's in virtually perfect condition with full original luster, no spots, no stains, and sharp strike details, you could be holding a coin worth $30,000 to $65,000. Yes, a penny worth more than a new car. But wait, there's more. In recent years, a few ultra-high-grade examples graded MS-68 have appeared at major auctions. These are coins that have been preserved in absolutely pristine condition for over 80 years. They show no oxidation, no contact marks, full blazing luster, and razor-sharp details. One example sold for over $90,000, another brought $120,000, and the finest known 1943 Philadelphia steel penny, it sold at auction for a staggering $450,000. That's right, nearly $500,000 for a penny. Why so much? Because it represents perfection. It's a museum-quality example of a one-year type coin from one of the most significant periods in American history. It's a piece of World War II that you can hold in your hand. So how do you identify a potentially valuable 1943 Philadelphia steel penny? First, check for the absence of a mint mark below the date. If there's no letter there, it's from Philadelphia. Second, examine the overall condition. The less wear and the less oxidation, the better. Third, look closely for any doubling in the letters, numbers, or design elements. Use a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe. Fourth, check if it's magnetic. Real 1943 steel pennies will stick to a magnet. If it doesn't and it looks copper-colored, you might have that ultra-rare error worth hundreds of thousands. And fifth, if you believe you have something special, get it professionally graded. The difference between a coin worth $50 and one worth $50,000 often comes down to grade and preservation. This 1943 Philadelphia steel penny represents American ingenuity and sacrifice during our nation's darkest hour. And today, these little pieces of history are commanding prices that would shock the people who spent them back in 1943. Next up, we have something truly special. And folks, if you thought the first two coins were impressive, wait until you hear about this one. We're looking at a 1943 D Steel Wheat Penny struck at the Denver Mint during the height of World War II. Now take a close look at this coin right here. You can see that telltale steel gray color with significant oxidation and toning across the entire surface. The date, 1943, is clearly visible at the bottom, and right below it, there's that tiny D Mint mark. That little letter D is your golden ticket because it tells you this penny came from Denver, Colorado. Lincoln's profile shows heavy circulation wear with substantial surface corrosion, those greenish-brown rust patches developing across the face and fields. The lettering, "In God We Trust" and "Liberty" are still legible, though worn. Flip it to the reverse and you'll see 1 cent with United States of America, all still readable despite the heavy oxidation and wear. This coin has been through the ringer, spent decades in circulation, passed through countless hands, and survived over 80 years. And that survival story is exactly what makes it valuable today. Now, here's what most people don't know about the Denver Mint's 1943 steel penny production. Denver struck approximately 217 million of these wartime pennies, significantly fewer than Philadelphia's massive 684 million, but more than San Francisco's 191 million. You'd think that would make Denver pennies common, but here's the shocking truth. Denver was a regional mint serving the western United States, and many of these coins stayed in circulation in western states where mining, ranching, and outdoor work was common. They got beat up, corroded faster in humid climates, and were often discarded when they started rusting. Soldiers from western states carried them overseas and never brought them back. Kids used them as toys. Families threw them in jars and forgot about them for decades. The result? Today, finding a 1943 D steel penny in any condition is becoming increasingly difficult. Finding one in exceptional condition, that's like winning the lottery. But let me tell you why the Denver Mint holds a special place in American coinage history. Established in 1906, the Denver Mint was built to serve the booming Western territories during the gold and silver rush era. By 1943, Denver was a critical production facility, churning out millions of coins to support the wartime economy. When the order came down to switch from copper to steel, Denver's mint workers faced unique challenges. The steel planches behaved differently than copper. They were harder, they wore down the dies faster, and they required constant adjustments to the striking pressure. This led to numerous varieties and errors that collectors hunt for today. Some 1943 D pennies show weak strikes, others have die cracks, and a few have dramatic doubled dies or repunched mint marks. These errors weren't intentional. They were the result of wartime production pressures and equipment strain. And today, those errors are worth a fortune. Let's talk about value, because this is where your eyes are going to pop out of your head. A heavily circulated 1943 D steel penny, like the one you're looking at right now, with significant wear and oxidation, is worth anywhere from $12 to $70 depending on the exact grade and eye appeal. That's already a fantastic return on a 1 cent investment. But here's where it gets exciting. If you find a 1943 D steel penny in uncirculated condition, meaning it never entered circulation, still has that original bright zinc coating with no oxidation or spots, you're looking at $300 to $700. Collectors are actively bidding on these at auctions. Now, if you find one with a repunched mint mark, where that D was stamped twice and shows clear doubling, the value jumps to $2,000 to $8,000. If you find a 1943 D with a bold double die obverse where the date or lettering shows dramatic doubling visible to the naked eye, you're holding a coin worth $10,000 to $35,000. Yes, a penny worth more than a used car, but wait, it gets even better. If you happen to find a 1943 D steel penny-graded MS 67 or higher by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, meaning it's in virtually flawless condition with full original luster, no contact marks, and razor-sharp details, you could be holding a coin worth $40,000 to $85,000. These high-grade examples are incredibly rare because most 1943 D pennies were spent immediately and never preserved. But here's the kicker. The part that's going to blow your mind. In 2010, a 1943 D copper penny, one of those ultra-rare errors where a copper planche was accidentally struck instead of steel, sold at auction for $1.7 million. Yes, you heard that right. $1.7 million for a penny. Only one 1943 D copper penny is known to exist, making it one of the rarest coins in American history. If you ever find a 1943 D penny that doesn't stick to a magnet that has that copper color and copper weight, stop everything, don't clean it, don't touch it, and get it authenticated immediately by PCGS or NGC. You could be holding a coin worth over $2 million today, but even beyond that legendary error, there are other valuable varieties to watch for. Some 1943 D steel pennies were struck on damaged or worn dies, creating what collectors call die cracks or die breaks. These show raised lines across the coin's surface where the die cracked under pressure. Depending on the severity and location, these can be worth $500 to $5,000. Others show off center strikes, where the design is shifted dramatically to one side, revealing part of the blank planche. These dramatic errors can fetch $3,000 to $12,000. And then there are the broad strikes, where the coin was struck without the retaining collar, resulting in a larger, thinner, and misshapen penny. These oddities are worth $1,000 to $6,000 to error collectors. So how do you identify a potentially valuable 1943 D steel penny? First, check for that D mint mark below the date. It should be small but clear. Second, examine the overall condition carefully. The less wear and oxidation, the higher the value. Third, use a magnifying glass to look for any doubling in the date, letters, or mint mark. Fourth, check if it's magnetic. Real 1943 steel pennies will stick to a magnet. If it doesn't, and it looks and feels like copper, you might have that $2 million error. And fifth, if you believe you have something special, get it professionally graded. The cost of grading is minimal compared to the potential value you could unlock. This 1943 D steel penny from the Denver Mint represents a unique chapter in American history, a time when our nation adapted under extraordinary pressure. And today, these survivors are commanding prices that would absolutely shock the people who spent them 80 years ago. Moving on to our fourth coin, and folks, hold on to your seats, because what you're about to hear is going to absolutely blow your mind. We're looking at a 1944 S wheat penny, and this coin represents one of the most dramatic transitions in American coinage history. Now look closely at this penny right here. You can see that distinctive brownish copper color with heavy oxidation and corrosion covering both sides. The date, 1944, is visible at the bottom, and right below it, there's that crucial S mint mark telling us this penny was struck at the San Francisco Mint. This coin shows extreme circulation wear with significant environmental damage, those dark brown and greenish patches spreading across the entire surface. The lettering is worn but still readable, and that's important for identification. This penny has been through decades of hard use, passed through countless transactions, survived over 80 years, and it's still here to tell its story. Now, here's what makes 1944 absolutely fascinating in the world of penny collecting. After the disaster of the 1943 steel pennies, the U.S. Mint made a critical decision. They were going back to copper, but not just any copper. The War Production Board authorized the Mint to use recycled brass shell casings from military firing ranges and battlefields. These spent cartridges, once used in combat, were melted down and reformed into penny planches. Think about that for a moment. The penny you're looking at right now could contain metal that was fired in battle during World War II. It could have brass from shell casings used at Normandy, Iwo Jima, or the Battle of the Bulge. Every 1944 penny is literally a piece of the war effort transformed from weapons of war into coins of peace. The San Francisco Mint struck approximately 282 million of these pennies in 1944, serving the Western United States and Pacific territories. But here's the shocking part. Most of these coins were heavily circulated, spent immediately, and worn down over decades. Finding a 1944 S penny today in any condition is becoming harder. Finding one in exceptional condition, that's extremely rare. But let me tell you about the errors that make certain 1944 S pennies worth an absolute fortune. When the Mint switched back to copper, they faced a unique problem. A few leftover steel planches from 1943 somehow remained in the production facility. These steel blanks accidentally got mixed into the 1944 copper penny production. The result, the legendary 1944 steel penny error. These are some of the rarest and most valuable coins in American history. Only a handful of 1944 steel pennies are known to exist from all three mints combined, and the 1944 S steel penny is the rarest of them all. In 2008, a 1944 S steel penny sold at auction and for $373,000. Today, experts estimate that if another example surfaced, it could bring $500,000 to $800,000 or more. If you ever find a 1944 S penny that sticks to a magnet that has that steel gray color instead of copper, stop everything and get it authenticated immediately. You could be holding a coin worth close to $1 million, but even regular copper 1944 S pennies have tremendous value potential. A heavily circulated example like the one you're looking at with extreme wear and corrosion is worth anywhere from 15 cents to $3 in lower grades. That might not sound like much, but remember, this is just the starting point. If you find a 1944 S penny in fine to extremely fine condition with moderate wear, but all details still visible and minimal corrosion, you're looking at $5 to $25. Now, here's where it gets exciting. If you find a 1944 S penny in uncirculated condition, meaning it never entered circulation, still has that original mint luster with no wear on Lincoln's cheek or the wheat stalk, so you're looking at $75 to $300. Collectors are actively seeking these because they're becoming increasingly scarce. But wait, there's more. If you find a 1944 S penny with a double die obverse where the date or lettering shows clear doubling, the value skyrockets to $3,000 to $18,000 depending on the strength of the doubling. If you find one with a repunched mint mark where that S was stamped multiple times and shows clear separation, you're holding a coin worth $1,000 to $8,000. And if you find a 1944 S penny with a dramatic off-center strike showing significant blank planche and shifted design, the value jumps to $1,000 to $15,000. These errors weren't quality control failures. They were the result of wartime production pressures, worn equipment, and the challenges of switching back to a different metal composition. Now, here's where things get absolutely insane. If you find a 1944 S penny graded MS 67 red or higher by PCGS or NGC, meaning it's in virtually perfect condition with full original red copper color, no spots, no toning, and razor-sharp strike details, you could be holding a coin worth $15,000 to $50,000. These high-grade examples are incredibly rare because most 1944 S pennies were immediately spent and circulated. But the Holy Grail? A 1944 S penny graded MS 68 red. Only a tiny handful exist in this grade. One example sold at auction for $98,000. Another brought $135,000. Why so much? Because these coins represent perfection. They've been preserved in museum quality condition for over 80 years, showing keying, no contact marks, full blazing luster, and complete original red color. They're investment-grade rarities that wealthy collectors compete for at major auctions. But let's talk about the ultimate 1944 S penny error that could make you a millionaire overnight. Remember those 1944 steel pennies I mentioned? Well, there's an even rarer variety, and some 1944 S pennies were struck on foreign planches, meaning blank coins intended for other denominations or even other countries. A 1944 S penny struck on a silver dime planche would be worth $200,000 to $400,000. One struck on a foreign planche could bring $300,000 to $600,000. And if you found a 1944 S penny with a major die break or cut error where a large piece of the die broke off, creating a dramatic raised blob on the coin, you're looking at $10,000 to $40,000 depending on the size and location. So how do you identify a potentially valuable 1944 S penny? First, check for that S mint mark below the date. It should be small but clear. Second, examine the color carefully. If it's steel gray instead of copper brown, you might have that legendary steel error worth hundreds of thousands. And third, use a strong magnifying glass to check for any doubling in the date, letters, or mint mark. Fourth, look at the overall strike quality. Weak strikes or off-center strikes can be valuable. Fifth, check the surfaces for any die cracks, cuds, or unusual features. And sixth, if you believe you have something special, get it professionally graded by PCGS or NGC. The difference between a coin worth $3 and one worth $300,000 often comes down to composition, errors, and grade. This 1944 S penny represents the transition from war to peace, struck from recycled shell casings that once defended freedom. And today, these survivors are commanding prices that would absolutely astound the soldiers who spent them 80 years ago. And now for our final coin. And folks, this one is going to leave you absolutely speechless. We're looking at another 1943 S Steel Wheat Penny from the San Francisco Mint. But this example tells a completely different story than our first San Francisco penny. Take a good look at this coin right here. You can see that steel gray color with extensive greenish-brown oxidation covering the entire surface. The date, 1943, is still visible at the bottom, and that S mint mark below it confirms this came from San Francisco. But what makes this particular coin fascinating is the level of preservation despite the heavy environmental exposure. Lincoln's profile shows substantial wear with thick corrosion layers, those greenish patinas that develop when steel pennies are exposed to moisture over decades. The lettering is worn but legible, and the overall strike quality is still discernible through all that toning. This penny has survived over 80 years in harsh conditions, and that survival against the odds is exactly what makes it valuable. Now, here's something most collectors don't realize about San Francisco's 1943 steel penny production. The San Francisco Mint struck approximately 191 million of these wartime pennies, making it the lowest mintage of all three mints that year. Philadelphia made 684 million, Denver made 217 million, but San Francisco, just 191 million. You'd think that lower mintage would make them more valuable across the board, but here's the twist. San Francisco pennies were primarily distributed throughout California, the Pacific Northwest, and to military installations in the Pacific Theater. Many of these coins ended up on ships in tropical climates exposed to salt air and humidity. The result? Massive corrosion and deterioration. Thousands upon thousands of 1943 steel pennies literally rusted away to nothing. Soldiers discarded them when they started corroding. Sailors threw them overboard. Families in coastal areas watched them turn to rust in jars and coin purses. Today, finding a 1943 steel penny in any condition is challenging. Finding one in pristine condition, that's nearly impossible. But let me tell you about the varieties and errors that make certain 1943 steel pennies worth an absolute king's ransom. During wartime production at San Francisco, the mint workers were under tremendous pressure. They were working around the clock. Dies were wearing out faster than normal because steel was harder than copper, and quality control was relaxed to meet production quotas. This led to some spectacular errors, and some 1943 pennies show bold doubled dies where the entire date or lettering was stamped twice with clear separation. These double die varieties are worth anywhere from $5,000 to $28,000, depending on the strength and location of the doubling. Others show repunched mint marks, where that S was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions. These can fetch $2,000 to $12,000. And then there are the dramatic off-center strikes, where the design is shifted so far that you can see significant blank planche. These errors are worth $6,000 to $22,000 to collectors who specialize in mint errors. But here's where things get absolutely mind-blowing. Remember those copper planches we talked about earlier? Well, San Francisco had them too. A few 1943 copper pennies were accidentally struck at the San Francisco Mint when leftover copper blanks from 1942 got mixed into the steel penny production. These are among the rarest coins in American history. In 2012, a 1943 copper penny sold at a major auction for $1 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $1 million for a single penny. Today, experts estimate that if another example surfaced in high-grade condition, it could bring $1.2 million to $1.8 million. Only 5 or 6 examples are known to exist, and every single one is accounted for in major collections or museums. But here's the thing that keeps collectors awake at night. There could be more out there. There could be a 1943 copper penny sitting in an old collection, hidden in an estate, waiting in a safety deposit box that hasn't been opened in decades. If you ever find a 1943 penny that doesn't stick to a magnet that has that copper color and copper weight, you need to stop everything and get it authenticated by PCGS or NGC immediately. You could be holding a coin worth over $1 million, but even regular steel 1943 pennies have tremendous value potential that most people completely overlook. A heavily circulated example like the one you're looking at with extreme wear and corrosion is worth anywhere from 20 cents to $4 in lower grades. That might seem modest, but remember, we're just getting started. If you find a 1943 steel penny in fine to extremely fine condition with moderate wear but all major details still visible and minimal surface corrosion, you're looking at $8 to $35. Now here's where it gets exciting. If you find a 1943 steel penny in about uncirculated condition, meaning it shows only slight wear on the highest points and retains much of its original zinc coating, you're looking at $60 to $200. Collectors actively seek these because they're becoming increasingly scarce as more examples succumb to corrosion. But wait, there's so much more. If you find a 1943 steel penny in mint state condition, meaning it never entered circulation, still has full, original bright zinc luster with no oxidation spots, you're looking at $200 to $600. These are highly sought after by collectors building complete Lincoln cent sets. Now, if you find a 1943 S penny graded MS66 or higher by PCGS or NGC, meaning it's in exceptional condition with minimal contact marks and strong eye appeal, you could be holding a coin worth $3,000 to $15,000. But here's where values absolutely explode. If you find a 1943 S steel penny graded MS67 or MS68, you're looking at $20,000 to $75,000. These ultra-high grade examples are incredibly rare because most San Francisco pennies were immediately spent and circulated heavily. One MS68 example sold at auction for $89,000. Another brought $112,000. Why such astronomical prices? Because these coins represent the absolute finest survivors from a mintage of 191 million coins, most of which have long since corroded away or been heavily worn. And then there are the truly spectacular error varieties that could make you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. If you find a 1943 S steel penny with a major die crack or cud error, where a large piece of the die broke off, creating a dramatic raised area on the coin, you're looking at $8,000 to $35,000, depending on size and location. If you find one struck on a wrong planche, meaning a blank intended for a different denomination, you could be holding a coin worth $150,000 to $400,000. A 1943 S penny struck on a silver dime planche would be worth $300,000 to $600,000. And if you found a 1943 S penny with multiple errors, say a double die combined with an off-center strike, you're looking at $50,000 to $120,000. These multi-error coins are the holy grail for error collectors. So how do you identify a potentially valuable 1943 S steel penny? First, check for that S mint mark below the date. It should be small but distinct. Second, test it with a magnet. Real 1943 steel pennies are magnetic. If it doesn't stick to a magnet and looks copper-colored, you might have that $1 million error. Third, examine the surfaces carefully with a magnifying glass for any doubling, repunching, or die cracks. Fourth, assess the overall condition honestly. The better the preservation, the higher the value. Fifth, look for any unusual features like off-center strikes, wrong planche errors, or die breaks. And sixth, if you believe you have something special, invest in professional grading by PCGS or NGC. The cost of grading is minimal compared to the potential value you could unlock. This final 1943 S steel penny represents the end of an era and the beginning of hope. It was struck during the darkest days of World War II, when victory was uncertain and sacrifice was universal. And today, these survivors are commanding prices that would absolutely stagger the people who spent them 80 years ago. From a few dollars for circulated examples to over $1 million for that legendary copper error, these pennies prove that sometimes the smallest things can be worth the most.